listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome everyone. Today I'm joined once again with my friend Philip Clift. For this episode, we will be exploring C.W. Leadbetter's book, The Chakras. This is part one of a two-part series we will be doing, so stay tuned for the next episode. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be back.
Yeah, we love having you. I know the audience loves these episodes because they're always at the top of my most listened to, so.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great information tonight. It's fun to share this stuff.
Yes, and I know we both enjoy Leadbetter's work, so this should be fun to talk about. So to start off, could you give us just a little bit of background and history on who C.W. Leadbetter is and some of his work?
Yeah. Well, he was born in 1854, died in 1934. He's best known as one of the primary figures, he and Annie Besant, of the Theosophical Society. This is like during the mini Renaissance Gilded Age era between, the late 1800s through the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. It was kind of in between the time of the founder of the Theosophical Society, Helena Blavatsky, and then the later leaders, Nicholas and Helena Roerich and Alice Bailey, who wrote the Blue Books. Mm-hmm. Leadbetter was a former priest in the Church of England, and he was a prodigious author. He wrote over 60 books and pamphlets on a variety of esoteric subjects during his years in the Theosophical Society. So that was, his years in the Theosophical Society were roughly 1883 through 1934. I mean, a good period of time. And, one of his more famous books is the book on the chakras that we'll be talking about today. But he also authored books on Freemasonry and its ancient mystic rites, the Astral plane.
Which we've done the episode on that one.
And clairvoyance, among many others on such arcane subjects. So I think it'd be helpful to do a little background on the Theosophical Society because that's really kind of the foundation of all this. So it was founded in 1875 in New York City by Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and a man named Henry Still Alcott, who's not very well known, but he was a founding member. It's essentially the organizational body of Theosophy. And for people who don't know what Theosophy is, it's an esoterically based new religious movement. It gained considerable popularity in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And it's still going strong today, honestly. And if anybody doesn't know what esoteric means, it means that Theosophy draws from the more mystical traditions of Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam, along with a strong influence from ancient occultism. Blavatsky herself is well known for her classic works of deep esotericism. The earlier one was called Isis Unveiled. These are both 2-book sets. So Isis Unveiled and then The Secret Doctrine came out later. They're like classic works of esotericism and very sophisticated and dense and hard to read.
Yes.
So the Theosophists, interestingly, I think they may not be as well known or well respected because they've been judged really harshly through the years, due to what many people regard as an inherent racism. Oh. Yeah, so even though Helena Blavatsky promoted the importance of all human races in her books, and her primary teachers were known as the Mahatmas, and they were more of I guess you'd say an Indo-Aryan descent. The term Aryans, where we get a lot of problem with all this. And then, another one of the teachers was named Jwal Kul, and he was Tibetan. So he's, clearly Asian descent. Interestingly, in my opinion, I think that the whole racism thing is an attempt by some faction to discredit the teachings using a manipulative sociopolitical narrative, because the teachings are profound
and universal.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of, truth in them, I believe. A lot of it really resonates with me. It's, even though it's really kind of hard to understand, it's a lot of it. It's, if you read it, over and over and really align yourself with it, it starts to resonate with a deep part of your subconscious. It's powerful stuff. So, I think back to the word Aryan, a lot of the racism comes from Blavatsky's, the name that she used for the fifth root race. Right. She called it the Aryan race. And, the term Aryan has been confused with the culturally appropriated term Aryan used by the Nazi Party and other neo-Nazi and white supremacist organizations. But just to give a little background on what the term Aryan actually means, historically it refers to the now well-known Indo-Aryan peoples of the ancient Vedic period, who populated the Indus River Valley area of the Indian subcontinent after having migrated down from Central Europe. So she's referring to an historical period and a historical people that, were really not well known until, I believe, the early 1900s, when it was the Vedic civilization and the Indus River Valley civilization were discovered. So, yeah.
And the root races always see them as like you said, points in time, and they reflect like the whole human race during that particular time period as we've evolved throughout. And there's supposedly even, we're not finished with that evolution.
There's two. There's still, we're the fifth. There's 7 total. So there's 2 yet to come.
So it's not discrediting the previous of the root races. It's just talking about the evolution throughout the different epochs of time and things like that. So.
Yeah, the evolution of the human collective.
The human race, not just based on our skin color race.
Yeah, exactly. So, and also, some people may not be familiar with what occultism is, or they may have a negative view of it. So it's, often it's associated with the darker side of philosophy and religion, but what the term actually means and what it refers to is hidden knowledge. So, and what many consider to be supernatural beliefs or practices that fall outside the realm of mainstream religion and orthodox science. I mean, it can be dark, but it also and often is the opposite.
Right. It just depends on the person, just like anything.
Yeah, absolutely. This may be helpful. Some of the more notable members of the Theosophical Society are the psychologist William James, kind of a founding member of the whole psychological therapy movement.
I love him. I didn't realize he was a Theosophist, so you just said that. But I loved his work in college. It really stood out to me. And I remember thinking, why did they not teach us this in high school?
Yeah, my younger son is actually named after him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then the poet William Butler Yeats was a Theosophist.
That makes sense.
And Mahatma Gandhi was also a Theosophist. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Back to Leadbeater. He was... One of the reasons that his book on chakras is so good, in my opinion, is that he was actually a highly adept clairvoyant, which means that he could very effectively perceive beyond the realm of the 5 senses common to the vast majority of humanity. A lot of people may not know this, but we only perceive 0.0035% of the electromagnetic spectrum visually. So the 65% of it is hidden to us. And people who are clairvoyant have the ability to see further into that spectrum, at higher frequencies. And that's kind of where the chakras exist, is at a higher frequency or a higher vibratory rate than what most people perceive. And he could see them. And because he could actually see them, he had a better feel for what they actually look like and what they actually do. You know, a lot of the other information on the chakras is based on, you know, ancient knowledge that's been written down in, you know, ancient Hindu and yoga texts from,
Right.
you know, thousands of years ago. But he was actually perceiving them in real time.
Right.
You know, and that, to me, that makes a huge difference. You know, interestingly though, Leadbetter is probably best known for the discovery of who he believed to be Theosophy's prophesized world teacher. So there was you know, Theosophy has felt like there's going to be like a, you know, a second coming, I suppose you would say. And he thought for sure it was a guy named Jiddu Krishnamurti. Yeah, he discovered him on a secluded beach, I believe in Tamil Nadu, India, back in 1909. And it turned out that he wasn't who he thought he was. So, you know, a lot of people may have discredited Leadbetter because of that, because he was, you know, he really felt like he had found the world teacher.
But he's an amazing teacher.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
He definitely saw something correctly. I just don't know if it was necessarily what he originally thought, but
Yeah.
his teachings are very profound.
He made a huge impact regardless.
Yeah.
You know, so they felt like that he probably wasn't who they thought he was, but, you know, like you said, he was, you know, amazingly insightful,
Right.
you know, so. That's about all I got
Okay.
on Leadbetter. He's very, very well respected in esoteric circles, for sure.
Yes. I really love reading his books because as much as I love Blavatsky, like Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, like you were saying, they're so dense and it's a lot of information in one place. And when I read it, my brain is like ricocheting. So I love Leadbetter's little pamphlets because it breaks a lot of that wisdom down into this really digestible,
Absolutely.
you know, like 80 to 100 page book. And it focuses on like one topic at a time.
Yeah.
So it's really helped me. And a lot of times I'll go back to Blavatsky's work after reading his stuff, you know, just to kind of see where he pulled it from. But it makes a lot more sense now because the first time I read Isis Unveiled, I just, like, if you would have asked me the line I just read, it was like I could not retain it. It was so, I guess, esoteric to me at the time that, like, it was hard to process. So when I started reading some of these other interpretations of her work, it helped me make a lot more sense of it and appreciate her work even more. So
I've heard that from pretty much everybody that's attempted to read it. You know, it's like it's like you almost get confused while you're reading it. You know,
Right, it doesn't
it's
flow.
No, not at all. It's amazing.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's great, but it's almost like reading like Secret Teachings of All Ages or something. It's like more of an encyclopedia, but it's not necessarily organized that way. But it's a whole lot of information strung together in one book. And so it's not necessarily always coherent going from one topic to the next. But I do, you know, think it's all valid and it's all really deep. But it's just, if someone's new on the path, they're not probably going to understand what she's talking about.
You know, a really interesting thing about that particular topic, and I learned this maybe 5 years ago, and I believe that this is true, that Blavatsky was intentionally creating a work of very advanced, what's called jnana yoga, the yoga of, you know, wisdom and knowledge. And what she was doing is she intentionally made her writing very obtuse because it caused people to kind of zone out and access their intuition
Right.
while they were doing it. It was a method of meditation, actually, because
Right.
you would be presented with a subject that was really arcane that you didn't understand, and it would cause you to kind of have a gap in your thinking. And at that point, the intuition kind of kicks in and comes through and teaches you from that realm. So there's really a lot more information available than what was actually written down on the pages, because you were probably touching, or you could be touching the Akashic or whatever.
Right.
You know, at that point while you're reading those works. So
You know, that makes sense because even though I felt like I wasn't retaining it, I would stumble upon certain things or have dreams and stuff and go back and be like, I think I got that from that book. But at the time, I didn't retain any of it. So there was one point where I had this dream, and the person I was talking to kept calling me a neophyte, which I guess is a word that she uses. But I was at McKay's one day, and I was reading the back of this book. I think it was like The Sheila and the Path, and it said the word neophyte multiple times. And then I started looking into it, and apparently this person this book was on was one of the Mahatmas, and neophyte was one of the words that she used a lot. But at the time I was reading the book, I didn't retain that. But then I later discovered, oh, that's where I learned that word from. That's why it was in my dream. And then it started showing up in my like waking reality. I started, attracting certain books and people that would say certain things. And I'm like, oh, I've heard that before. But at the time, I didn't think I was actually integrating any of it. So
that shows you how profound this stuff is, because it actually speaks to your subconscious.
Right.
A lot of it, and you don't even realize what you're taking in.
Right.
It's extremely powerful in that way.
For sure. So can we explore what a chakra is and the culture that this information originated out of?
Yes. Okay. For this question, what I'd like to do, and really what I think would be most helpful, is to answer this and some of the other questions with first the standard modern, more kind of mainstream yogic interpretation of some of this, like if you did a Google search or if you bought a modern book or whatever, what you would get, and then offer some of the key differences that Leadbetter presents. Okay, really now, in the most basic sense, a chakra is a Sanskrit word meaning wheel. And it's a spinning wheel, highly energetic. If you look up the term on Google, and this is by way of Oxford Languages, it defines the term in Indian thought, interestingly, Indian thought, each of the centers of spiritual power in the human body, usually considered to be 7 in number. Merriam-Webster defines chakra as any of several key points of physical or spiritual energy in the human body, according to yoga philosophy. Now, Leadbetter is more specific. He defines chakras as a series of wheel-like vortices that exist in the surface of the etheric double of man. He also describes them as force centers that are points of connection at which energy flows from one vehicle or body of a person to another. Now, that assumes that we have multiple bodies simultaneously existing at different levels of vibration or frequency.
Right, which we had an episode on the etheric double and then the 7 bodies, which was kind of the precursor to this one. So if that confuses you, you can go back and listen to that one. And it goes along with this work. Yeah,
excellent. It also, according to several different sources of esoteric thought, the human body is composed of multiple layers or sheaths. And they exist at varying degrees of frequency or vibration, from the very high frequency spiritual layers to the more gross and slowly vibrating physical body. So in yoga, the tantric system of this is called the kosha system.
Right.
So the physical body is called the Annamaya kosha, and then the subtle body, the more subtle energetic body that kind of relates to the etheric double, is known as the pranamaya kosha. And that's where the chakras, the nadis, all the subtle energy things that are present in yoga exist.
Right.
Now, one of the interesting and key differences is with yoga, my understanding of it is that the subtle energetic bodies exist within the physical body. Like you go toward the micro.
Right.
Right. And with the etheric double and with the theosophy stuff, it seems like, and this could be just a trick of perception or whatever, I don't know, but it seems like they project outward away from the body. Well, and I don't understand why those are different.
In the book that I read, as I was reading it, I was aware of that. There is a set of chakras for each of the levels. So like the astral body had its own set of chakras, the etheric body had its own set of chakras, and then the physical body. So it's like the etheric ones were almost the ones that are seen kind of on the outside, And then the physical body has its own set, and they correspond to the other ones.
Yeah.
But they get more subtle and more subtle.
Yeah, the chakras actually connect the different layers of
Right,
the body.
right.
That's one of their primary functions. So, yeah. So the etheric double, to my knowledge, is specific to Theosophy and Ageless Wisdom. I don't know of another system that uses that exact term, the etheric double. So it's interesting.
Yeah, some people say the etheric body, and like you said, the pranamaya kosha, but I do think that they're the ones that created that word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very descriptive. So, and one of the really interesting things about chakras is that the term itself is almost universally incorrectly pronounced by the general public. Most people say chakra, and I've heard even like high level yogis and other subtle energy workers say the word that way, but that's actually incorrect. And why that's important is that the actual vibration or the actual sound of the word is very specific, and it's meant to be pronounced in a very specific way to actually describe and have that energy penetrate into your consciousness. So it has to be spoken properly. So if you're saying chakra, you're talking about something completely different.
Right.
The word is actually, the CH is hard, like in chair, right? Mm-hmm. And not soft like chevron, okay? And the A's lean more toward a hard U. So it's actually like chakra.
Right.
Yeah, it's not even chakra, it's more chakra if it's said correctly. And and the way that's spoken has a very specific vibratory quality to it that's important. So
yes, I learned that with Kundalini yoga, because the mantras, like the way you're insinuating them, the length that you hold a certain point of the mantra is important, and it's very specific for a reason, because you have an intention, and like this is like the code that unlocks that intention. It needs to be done a certain way, so there's almost like a ritual about it. And
yes, yeah. It's extremely important to say it properly. Okay, so back to the where the understanding of chakras originated. Now this is going to be kind of a multi-part, because there are several different options here. So knowledge and understanding of the chakra system most likely emerged during post-cataclysmic times within the Vedic civilization. That's a period of Earth's history that was just recently discovered and acknowledged. For a long time, people, historians, anthropologists, orthodox scientists of several different disciplines thought that human civilization originated in ancient Sumer. Mm-hmm. But it turns out that the Vedic civilization is actually just as old, if not older. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that was the origins of modern human civilization. So the Vedic civilization was a composite of the Indo-Aryan and Indus Valley cultures of northeastern Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northwestern India. And the knowledge of chakras and subtle energy was likely information that was gleaned from the ancient rishis. Mm-hmm. Many don't realize this, but the Vedas, Vedic culture, yoga, Ayurveda, and Sanskrit language in general predate Hinduism. So they're not Hindu. Mm. They were, I think, kept alive within the Hindu culture. And the Hindu culture kind of blended with the earlier Indo-Aryan culture, but all those things predate Hinduism. They're actually Indo-Aryan in origin. Mm. And that's probably where understanding of the chakras actually occurred. But if you want to get even more arcane, it's possible that this knowledge was passed down and safeguarded from pre-cataclysmic times. Now, if you asked Blavatsky or any of the other highly clairvoyant people, they would say that most of that knowledge was probably passed down from Atlantean or even Lemurian times, which would be millions of years ago, according to them.
Right.
And so in modern times, the Vedic period was during what's known as a Treta Yuga. So the yugas are something, they're these cyclical periods of time that relate to the evolution and development of human consciousness. There are 4 of them, and they occur at different scales of time. So there's one that was rediscovered by a teacher, a guru in India named Sri Yukteswar, who was the teacher of the well-known Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote the famous book Autobiography of a Yogi. So he discovered the yuga cycles, but they relate to the precessional cycle. So it's a 25,920 year period that the signs, the zodiac signs, actually move through the zodiac. It's 1 degree every 72 years. So it takes 2,160 years approximately for each sign to move through this larger cycle. And it turns out that all 12 of them, it takes 25,920 years. So that alone kind of tells you how sophisticated the people were who came up with this yuga system. They actually cataloged the movement of the equinoxes through the zodiac to for an extremely long period of time and to a very high level of sophistication. And so the 4 different yugas are the Satya, which means the golden age, the Treta, which is more of a silver age, the Dvapara, which is a kind of a bronzish age, and then the Kali Yuga, which is known as an iron age. So we're currently, according to Yukteswar, we're currently in a Dvapara Yuga. Now, that means that we are consciously more disconnected from source. So information is not as easily intuited or understood as it is in the earlier periods like the Treta or the Satya Yuga, where we were very aligned with the whoever created the physical universe, right? So we're very aligned with that really powerful energetic, and information flows through really easily. So that's why the rishis were able to access information on the subtle energetic system in such high levels of detail, because they were really, really aligned with it on a deep level of consciousness. So, and it's harder to access that now because we're in a different yuga period.
Right. You're not necessarily born with it unless you've come in with certain karma to have those kind of centers open. And a lot of times that clairvoyance has to be worked for, and you have to be really dedicated to open. Absolutely. In that way. But every now and then you'll get someone, like Leadbetter or somebody that, based on their past lives, they're born with that openness because they opened it already. Yeah. And they got to carry it along.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Once you've accessed it, it stays with you.
Right.
So, yeah, obviously Leadbetter was, he worked really hard to develop that at some point, in the past. And yeah, he brought it forward with him into his current or into that particular incarnation. So, yeah. So, this goes back to the root races again. And it's believed that each root race is transformed or alchemized into the next one by way of a global cataclysm. The last global cataclysm that we had, according to this system, was during the Younger Dryas period. And interestingly, that relates to the ruins found in Turkey that are the oldest that we've actually confirmed the age of, and it's called Göbekli Tepe. Yeah, and actually goes back and to the point of what the Younger Dryas Cataclysm was. It was about 11,500 years ago, roughly. So, and the ruins at Göbekli Tepe are extremely sophisticated. 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, if it gives you any idea of how far back that actually was. That's 6,000 years before. I mean, that's maybe at least 3,000 years before Orthodox scientists believed that modern human civilization began. So it's forced people to completely rewrite history books.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I love that there's people like this that have kind of channeled some of this wisdom from, the Akashic Records or whatever source that they're tuning into. But then, historians and all these people are out here digging stuff up and are like, oh, and it just really validates some of the work that they, were giving to us before they could technically prove some of this stuff. And now we're starting to really date things back like even further. And we're really like digging a lot deeper into, humanity's origins, which are a lot different than we were taught in school,
Yeah, as Graham Hancock would say, stuff just keeps getting older.
Yes.
And I love that quote, and it's true. I mean,
everything
is like getting older and older and further back, and it's really throwing a monkey wrench in most people's understanding of human history.
Right.
And it's validating a lot of this esoteric knowledge that was brought forth in the works of Blavatsky and people, of her ilk. Mm-hmm. If you asked most like Orthodox historians, even yoga historians, they would very likely say that the understanding of chakras and subtle energy is actually imaginary. Like it's something that people have come up with to describe what they experience and perceive as the internal dynamics occurring in yoga, that that it doesn't actually exist in reality. But I think that's just based on an inability to, what we talked about earlier, perceive more deeply into that electromagnetic spectrum and actually recognize the presence of these things, because they're actually really there.
Right.
I mean, Leadbetter could see them.
Absolutely.
And he had, I don't know if he drew them, but he had someone draw very detailed images of them, and he would say that he himself would say that knowledge of the chakras and subtle energetic systems stems directly from teachings brought forth from Shambhala by way of the Trans-Himalayan school. If you don't know what Shambhala is, it's interesting because it's represented in imagery within the Tibetan Buddhism in the what's called the Kala Chakra mandala. So the mandala is it's a two-dimensional image of a three-dimensional structure, which is really fascinating, and it's believed to exist in inner Earth. And I think what that means is a higher dimensional realm that may exist within the Earth itself, or above the Earth, or somewhere that's not really accessible, by foot necessarily.
Right.
But that where teachers like bodhisattvas and ascended masters reside, and that are helping humanity in the evolutionary process.
Right. So as you were saying this, I had this memory of us talking about the alchemy of the nine dimensions, because, the iron core crystal center of the earth is where Earth's Akashic records are stored. So it's interesting because when I'm in the records, that's when I'm able to sort of access some of these guides and masters, and, they're there to help humanity. So it's interesting to think about it being in the earth when it's, that's one of the ways to access the Akashic records and to get the guidance from these particular, masters or adepts and things like that. So it's, I don't know. I just clicked when you were explaining it that way.
It's like they're there just kind of waiting for somebody to tap into it so they can guide them.
Right.
Essentially. And the hope is that you can clearly perceive what they're saying and trying to teach, so that you can accurately, give it to other people. And that's one of the reasons that Blavatsky, Roerich, and Alice Bailey were chosen as what were called amanuenses. So the masters in Shambhala felt like that they were really clear and that they could receive the information without too much obstruction of their own personalities.
Right.
Their own filters, you might say, that would limit what was coming through.
Absolutely.
So they felt like they were clear channels, essentially.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, so it's really interesting, and a lot of people think that that Shambhala is kind of focused near Tibet, maybe within the inner earth or above the earth or whatever within Tibet. And the Tibetan people, the Tibetan race, was actually the very last branch race of the last subrace of the Atlantean root race.
Right.
So they actually have a genetic heritage that goes back to Atlantean times.
So some of those gifts may have still been alive within them.
In their DNA.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is really powerful. Yeah.
All right. So let's explore each chakra individually. And could you explain a little bit about how Leadbetter's interpretation of the chakras differ from some of the more common diagrams that we see of them?
Yes. Well, first of all, there are many minor chakras existing throughout the body. Now, there are different systems that explain these things in different ways. Supposedly, there are many chakras, like in your hands and your feet, throughout your body. But there are 7 primary ones that when most people refer to the chakra system, they're talking about these 7. And 7 is a number that it comes up over and over again in esoteric wisdom. There's 7 root races, 7 chakras, 7 rays that come down from the galactic core through the Little Dipper, the stars of the Little Dipper, and they go down, and it goes down through a few different other areas into the earth, and we receive information from the galactic core that way. But back to the chakras. So they're located along what's called Sushumna Nadi, which it's the centralmost and primary subtle energetic channel. Now, these channels in yoga are called nadis. In Chinese medicine, they're referred to as meridians. People might be more familiar with the term meridian. But each chakra has a specific Sanskrit name, and the name itself and how it's pronounced, like we said earlier, is really important because that describes it energetically.
Right.
A lot of the stuff in yoga, people don't recognize this, but the chanting, the mantras, they're supposed to be said a very specific way because they're trying to create a really, really specific vibration or frequency. So if they're said incorrectly, they don't do that. So you have to be able to pronounce the words properly. And hopefully I'll pronounce them properly tonight.
Right, you do the best you can.
Do the best I can, yeah. So each chakra, again, has a specific Sanskrit name and describes the internal body, mind, or emotional dynamics that it governs. Another thing that's important before we start is there's a lot of talk about chakras being balanced or imbalanced. So, and it's important to understand it's probably not the chakra itself, but it's more our relationship to each of the chakras that becomes imbalanced, that creates the imbalance. So
Right.
it has to do with the evolution of our consciousness and where we are on the path, essentially as to how the chakras are functioning.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a subtle but important distinction. So in essence, they directly reflect the state of the evolution of each individual's consciousness, how attuned they are to their larger self or their soul. Yeah, so they're pretty much a direct reflection of that. Okay, and we'll start at the base of the spine, at the root chakra. Sanskrit term is Muladhara. It's located in the area from the base of the spine / pelvic floor. So the tip of the coccyx and the pelvic floor. So the very bottom of your torso, essentially. And it goes down, it has an effect down approximately midway down the legs toward the knees. It's red in color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give information based on the modern interpretation of these things. And then I'm going to give Leadbetters.
Right.
So in the modern world, it's seen as red. It has 4 spokes. So there are petals on each of these chakras, and that's important because they're waves or undulations that show how highly energetic the thing is. So the fewer petals, the denser and more and less energetic the chakra is. And that's important because it relates to that part of your consciousness. So it's associated with the element earth. And physically with the spine, the kidneys, bladder, the large intestine, and the process of elimination. And it governs, so the energy, the subtle energetics of the chakra itself govern one's most fundamental survival needs. So it would relate to the first dimension in Barbara Hanklow's stuff. So the iron core crystal of the earth, It would relate to that. There's another interesting thing that I found while I was doing some research on this, and it's believed that each of the chakras relate to a spiritual law. And I actually didn't know this, and I'd never seen it anywhere else. But Muladhara apparently relates to the law of karma.
Oh, that makes sense, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, it's about survival, and how important that is for the development of our consciousness.
Right. And I think about actual roots, as like our ancestors and, our genetic history and some of that karma that can carry over, even that we're kind of given from our ancestors to kind of help work through and process. So it does make sense that karma would be associated with that one.
Yes. Each chakra also has a mantra. So a short word that you can chant to connect yourself with that particular chakra. And the word for Muladhara is Lam. It's spelled Lam, but it's pronounced more like Lum, Lum, Lum. Now, Leadbetter, he often refers to the chakras as centers. So he won't necessarily say the word chakra, he'll say the root center or the brow center or the heart center or whatever. And he perceives them visually much differently from, the common images you might pull up on Google. So rather than pure red, he sees Muladhara, when highly active, as a fiery orange red. So it has a lot of orange in it. And interestingly, that corresponds closely with the vital force that's moving down from what he calls the spleen chakra.
Right.
Yeah. Now, in modern terminology, it's called the sacral chakra.
Right.
But that's one of the major differences in his chakra system, is that he views the second chakra as the spleen chakra rather than the sacral chakra. And the two areas of the body are completely different.
Right. So some of that sacral is getting woven into the root.
It is. Yeah. The downward moving aponic energy is weaving it into the root chakra. Yeah.
Right. So he's not ignoring it. He's just kind of combining those two a little bit.
Yeah. He sees them as woven together rather than functioning individually.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's, it's located at the base of the spine. So the coccyx and the pelvic floor, down into about midway through the legs. Midway through the thighs. Yeah. The next one, as we move up the body toward the head, the sacral chakra, it's called Svadhisthana. It's located along the area above the pelvic floor to just below the navel. And it's orange. And it has 6 petals or undulations, so it's slightly more highly vibratory than the root chakra. Leadbetter, like we described earlier, says this chakra is located directly over the spleen, which is slightly above and toward the left hemisphere of the body in most people. So he's actually got it off of Sushumna and to the left side of the body. So that would relate more to the secondary nadi, Ida. The two secondary nadis are called Ida and Pingala, and we'll talk more about those the next time we meet. But he's got it kind of over near Ida instead of Sushumna, which is interesting. So the sacral chakra is associated with the element water. Physically, it is related to the sexual organs, and it governs creativity in all its various forms, from physical reproduction to artistic expression, social integration, emotional intelligence, and prosperity and abundance. So it does a lot. And it's believed that the law of least effort governs Svadhisthana. So it has to do with being in flow and being able to be relaxed in a flow state in a lot of ways. The mantra for Svadhisthana is VAM, V-A-M. So if you felt like your Svadhisthana area was imbalanced, then if you deliberately got into a practice where you chanted VAM over and over, you could begin to get that back into a more balanced resonance over time. Yeah. Leadbetter refers to Svadhisthana as the spleen center, and he views it as multicolored. Its 6 spokes radiate red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. So all the colors of the chakras viewed from the modern perspective are present in the spleen chakra, which is really interesting. It's the only one that's like that. To my knowledge.
Yes. In the etheric double, I have a picture that I've painted from the book because it was just easier for me to process. But all those colors, it was saying that the splenic center is the center that's absorbing that vitality from the outside. Like we can eat things to get that vital energy and do other things, but it's like it's absorbing the traveling vitality globules is what he says. But in that globule, all the colors are there. So it travels into the spleen and the spleen turns and sends the colors to the proper place, if that makes sense. But it took me a while to be able to understand it. But I read a couple books and people explaining it, and it finally made sense that they're entering, and that's why all the colors are associated, because it's kind of like the processing plant for the rays.
Yes.
And it sends them to the proper corresponding area.
Yeah, to directly quote Leadbeater in his book, it is devoted to the specialization, subdivision, and dispersion of the vitality emanating to us from the sun.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That's what the vitality globules, that's where they come from, is the sun.
Yeah, so hence the more prismatic color scheme.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, he actually has it placed, again, like I said earlier, slightly above and to the left, directly above the spleen of the third chakra, Manipura. And interestingly, that's the only one that he doesn't have a Sanskrit name for in his book. The rest of them, he has the same Sanskrit name that we all do, but he doesn't name that one Svadhisthana for some reason. I don't know why. I have no idea why. It's really interesting. Okay, moving up toward the crown of the head, we have the solar plexus chakra, Manipura. It's also known as Nabi chakra. Nabi is a Sanskrit word for navel. It covers the area from the navel to the lower ribs. It's yellow and it has 10 petals, so it's slightly more highly energetic. It's associated with the element fire. And physically with the liver, the gallbladder, the stomach, and spleen. So the modern interpretation of the chakras has the spleen associated with the third chakra instead of the second. And that relates kind of more to where it is in the physical body. So that's one of the key differences in Leadbetter's system. Also the pancreas, and it governs how we present in the world at large. through our career and general capabilities and our overall self-esteem. The law of intention and desire govern Manipura. And its mantra is Rum, like R-U-M. So Leadbetter refers to Manipura as the umbilical, navel, or solar plexus center, and says it's very closely associated with feelings and emotions of various kinds. So he really brings feelings into it. It's located at the navel over the solar plexus, and its predominant color is various shades of red with a great deal of green, which would mean that it's highly influenced by the heart and the root, interestingly. Primarily influenced by the heart, because there's a lot of green in it, according to Leadbetter. Okay, now we're going to move to the heart chakra, or anahata in Sanskrit. It sits from the mid to upper rib cage, sternum area, to the collarbones. It's green. It has 12 petals or undulations. Now, this one is located slightly to the left of Sushumna, or the body's midline, the spinal column. Sushumna relates directly to the spinal column on a subtle energetic level. So he has the heart chakra actually directly over the heart, just like he has the spleen chakra directly over the spleen.
Right.
Now, in the more modern interpretation, has it in the center of the body, right at the midline. So that's another key difference. It's linked, obviously, to the physical heart. There's a lot more going on with the heart than we have realized. There's a lot of new research occurring with what's called the Heart Math Institute. They're studying the heart, and they found all these different facts about the heart that are absolutely fascinating. It's a completely different kind of muscle. It's almost like it has a stronger magnetic field than the brain. It's almost like it's its own thing that exists symbiotically with the human body. It's really fascinating. And they've also found that it doesn't pump blood. Like the blood moves on its own accord. It has a kind of verticular like motion through the body, kind of like a tornado, like a tornadic movement through the body. The heart is not strong enough to actually pump blood throughout the entire body.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it has, it could maybe push blood, maybe 6 feet up into the air at best, but to actually pump it through the entire body, it would be like pumping what I think is maybe a 10-pound weight, 150 feet in the air.
Right.
It's the amount of force or pressure that it would cause that would be necessary to actually pump blood through the body. So that's a recent discovery. People have always thought that the heart pumped blood through the body, but it actually functions completely differently from that, and it has a much more important function than just pumping blood.
Yeah. When I was reading about esoteric astrology, which comes from the Alice Bailey books, they talk about the heart as being like the antakarana, which is like the bridge between the lower and higher spheres. So it's interesting because it is operating a lot differently than these other organs in the physical body, but it serves a kind of a really important purpose, even on the esoteric level, as being the bridge into that higher sphere, that higher state of consciousness. And that's exactly what it's acting as.
Yeah, it's the bridge between the lower chakras, or the lower nature of consciousness, and the higher nature of consciousness. So it's important to get that balance in your heart chakra, and the heart, and it also physically relates to the circulation of blood. It relates to it. It doesn't cause it, but it relates to it, and vagus nerve function. So, and Anahata governs our sense of love, empathy, sympathy, and potentially compassion. And it relates to dimension 5,
right?
The 5th dimension. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And compassion is such a key that a lot of these ascended masters teach. You have to be able to be a compassionate being in order to hit those like ascended realities. And it's, it seems kind of silly, when you're preaching like compassion and forgiveness and love, but it really is necessary. You can't go further beyond that point until you've mastered those particular themes.
Yeah, compassion is a very, very high state of consciousness. People throw the word around a lot and act like they are experiencing compassion, but if you don't have empathy, you can't have compassion. Empathy comes before compassion.
Right.
Empathy is just the ability to pick up on emotional states of other beings. Sympathy is being able to actually sympathize with the empathic feelings that you get. And compassion is like this really, really high state of consciousness where you feel like this profound sense of universal love for what you're picking up on.
Right. And you may actually act upon those feelings, like actually helping the person that's struggling in whatever way that you could. Or
Yeah, exactly. Like the $10 I gave to the guy at the gas station on the way over here.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, I'd like to think that was an act of compassion. I don't know. I'm not claiming that I've developed that much, but
I think that would be a great example of a modern day act of compassion.
Yeah, and okay, so the mantra is Yam. And Leadbeater, rather than the green that we associate heart chakra with, says the heart is a glowing golden color. And again, it's located directly over the heart instead of in the midline of the body, right at the sternum. All right, so moving up, we have next the throat chakra, Vishuddha. It rests in the area above the collarbones up to the eyes. It's blue and has 16 petals. And again, I just want to emphasize that as the petal count increases, or the undulation count increases, we're increasing in spiritual presence. So these are more highly spiritual in nature. So the throat chakra is actually more highly spiritual in nature than the heart chakra. Throat chakra is associated with the lungs, the larynx, pharynx, and along with the heart, the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the one that helps induce relaxation and a sense of calmness throughout the body. So, and it's the center of all forms of expression, with one of the primary being our ability to effectively communicate. And that's a huge one because that's one of the biggest problems that we experience in the world today is an inability to communicate effectively. And that's why there's so much strife and conflict in the world, because a lot of us think and feel in very similar ways, but because we can't communicate those effectively, we create these almost artificial boundaries between people and races and nations and all that. And a lot of that has to do with communication. And our ability to express ourselves effectively. So you can't, if you don't know who you are, if you haven't done the work, the deep internal probing and psychological work to figure out who you are, then you can't express yourself effectively because you don't know who you are. Right. You can't speak your truth because you don't understand your truth. And your ability to give and receive information from others is going to be limited because of that. And it's also important to realize how important not only self-expression, but the opposite of that, which would be listening, is in communication. I feel like, and I'm very guilty of this myself, like I feel like if I'm discussing an important topic with someone and I have thoughts about it, that I can fall into the trap of thinking about my own thoughts rather than listening to what they may have to say. And it's critically important that you're able to kind of shut out your own thoughts and be present with another person to have effective communication.
Right, because your response is going to be more genuinely based off what they're actually saying or asking or explaining. So just taking that moment to just pause and like really hear them and integrate what they say before you respond, And I feel like in our culture, it's so busy. We're always thinking about what we're going to say next instead of just taking the time to truly listen. I feel like it's an art that we've kind of lost.
it is definitely an art. And I think it's one of the reasons that throat chakra is really imbalanced in most people.
Oh, I hear that one the most. People are like, I have a blocked throat chakra, and it's something that has to be practiced. Like clear communication takes a lot of intention and time and
care.
And care, yeah.
Yeah, you have to really want to be able to communicate with other people to do it effectively, And most people are so self-centered and caught up in their own drama that they're too self-focused. And that's why throat chakra is governed by the law of detachment. See, because you've got to be able to detach from your own drama in order to communicate effectively.
Right.
Yeah. So the mantra for throat chakra is Ham, H-A-M. And Leadbetter says the chakra is located at the front of the throat and has a great deal of blue and green, but it's primarily silvery and gleaming with a kind of suggestion of moonlight upon rippling water. So he doesn't give a lot of detail about throat, but he goes into great detail with the brow chakra and the crown. And if we have time, what I've decided to do is just read from the book on his description of brow and crown because it is extensive. If we don't have time, we can cover it next time.
Yeah, we can do it.
Okay. All right. So moving up, we have the brow chakra, or the brow center, as Leadbetter would say. It's also known as the third eye, or Ajna chakra. It's located above the eyes to the point of the crown of the head. It's indigo, and even though it looks in images like it has 2 petals, it actually has 96.
Right.
So it's a massive leap from 16 at throat to 96 with brow. And that shows you how highly energetic and how highly spiritual in nature that chakra is. Each petal represents 48 chakras. So Ajna is associated with the left and lower brain, ears, nose, and left eye, and it governs intuition and insight, and also one's ability to engage effectively in rational thought. And it's governed by the law of cause and effect. Its mantra is Om. So when you chant Om, your third eye is resonating. Now, Leadbetter does not say anything about third eye in the entire book. There's not one mention of third eye in the entire book. But he, Rachel, will you shine the light on this? He goes into great detail with what he calls brow center or brow chakra. Okay, so I'm going to read directly from the book here. The sixth center, the frontal, between the eyebrows, has the appearance of being divided into halves, one chiefly rose-colored. Now, we see it as indigo in modern interpretation of it, but he has it rose-colored with a great deal of yellow about it. And the other predominantly a kind of purplish blue. Again, closely associated, closely agreeing with the colors of the special types of vitality that vivify it. Leadbetter's got a really good vocabulary, as people in that era did.
He does.
Have you ever heard anybody use the word vivify? Perhaps it is for this reason that this center is mentioned in Indian books as having only 2 petals, though if we are to count undulations of the same character as those of the previous centers, we find that each half is subdivided into 48 of these, making 96 in total, because its primary force has that number of radiations. The sudden leap from 16 to 96 spokes, and again the even more startling variation from 96 to 972 at crown chakra, show us that we are now dealing with centers of an altogether different order from those which we have hitherto been considering. We do not yet know all the factors which determine the number of spokes in a chakra, but it is already evident that they represent shades of variation in the primary force. Before we can say much more than this, hundreds of observations and comparisons must be made, repeated, and verified over and over again. But meantime, this much is clear, that while the need of the personality can be satisfied by a limited number of types of force, when we come to the higher and more permanent principles of man, we encounter a complexity, a multiplicity, which demands for its expression a vastly greater selection of modifications of the energy. So that's how he describes brow chakra. Very complex. And interesting. I mean, you wouldn't get that in any other book, I can assure you.
Right.
You know. So now we'll move from... Essentially, the thing that you need to understand about brow chakra is that it's the seat of intuition.
Right.
You know, and that's really important. And that's one of the primary attributes of humanity that is kind of missing in the world today. Is we tend to be overly reliant on rational thought, you know, and we've kind of lost touch. Now, this is as a whole with our intuitive guidance. And that's in a lot of the esoteric circles, particularly the people that are still involved with the ageless wisdom and theosophy. One of their primary goals is to help humanity regain a connection to intuitive guidance, which is so important. And you know, it makes sense that we've done that because we've been kind of inundated with the scientific revolution in the modern world, and science has become a god for many people, you know. I mean, they look at science almost with the same type of fervor that a lot of really orthodox religious people look at God, you know. So
And if you think about clear sight, I mean, it requires both states of vision of seeing, you know, what's physically in front of you, but also seeing with that third eye, that intuition of, you know, there's many times I see somebody, but then I also have this sensation of, oh, there's something deeper going on. That comes from my intuition. I don't necessarily see it in their physical demeanor, but intuitively with that extra sight, I can tell that there's something deeper going on. So I feel like to really see a situation clearly, you need to use all three of your eyes.
You do. And one of the problems that we have in the modern world is that physically the third eye relates to the pineal gland, and a lot of people's pineal glands are calcified.
Right.
So they're actually like rigidly non-functional.
Right.
And it's really important that you decalcify your pineal gland if you want to be able to balance your brow chakra and access intuition. There are certain certain foods that you can use to do that. You can put your forehead on the floor and do bee breathing, where you're kind of humming as you breathe, and it's supposed to break up the calcifications. But in my personal experience, the best way to decalcify your pineal gland is to practice the art and ancient science of sun gazing.
Yes.
And that's a whole nother story. I can talk about that. I'd be happy to talk about sun gazing sometime, because I did it for a long time and I got a lot out of it. And I really do feel like it decalcified my pineal gland to a large degree. So
yeah, absolutely.
Super powerful practice.
And ditching the fluoride.
Yes.
Just stop that.
If anybody out there that's using fluoride, you know, in their toothpaste, you got to get rid of that.
And drinking it, which is even worse, because it's just constantly ingesting it. I mean,
our tap water has a tremendous amount of fluoride in it. Fluoride's a proven neurotoxin.
Right.
Yeah. And even showering with it, you absorb some of it. Yeah. So filter your tap water.
It's almost like they want us to be more sedated and not seeing clearly. And
yeah. Docile,
we're easier to be manipulated when we're not seeing with all of our full sight.
100%. Okay. So our last movement up would be the crown or coronal chakra. It's hard to pronounce. Sahasrara. It's located on the top of the head, and above is either white or violet, and is known as the 1,000-petaled lotus. It actually has 972 undulations, but that's close enough. It's associated with our right and upper brain and right eye and governs the unbounded aspect of self, the Atman, or the observer or witness consciousness. So that deepest layer of consciousness that kind of observes what's going on in your daily life in the background.
Right.
Yeah, the most fundamental aspect of consciousness, which is the Ananda Maya. It relates to the Ananda Maya Kosha and the Kosha system, Ananda meaning the Sanskrit term for bliss. Mm-hmm. So it's governed by the law of pure potentiality. Its mantra is either pure silence or also Om. And Leadbetter has a lot to say about crown chakra. The seventh center, the coronal, at the top of the head, so this is quoting directly from the book, is when stirred into full activity, the most resplendent of all, full of indescribable chromatic effects and vibrating with almost inconceivable rapidity. It seems to contain all sorts of prismatic hues, but is on the whole predominantly violent. It is described in Indian books as thousand-petaled, and really this is not very far from the truth. A number of radiations of its primary force in the outer circle being 960. I thought he said 972 earlier, but he's saying 960 here. So every line of this will be seen faithfully reproduced in our frontispiece. Wow, I have no idea what that word means. Frontispiece. I think I looked it up before when I was reading the book, and I've forgotten what it means. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
But you can look it up. It's spelled Frontispiece. Okay, though it's hardly possible to give the effect of the separate petals. In addition to this, it has a feature which is possessed by none of the other chakras, a sort of subsidiary central whirlpool of gleaming white flushed with gold in its heart, a minor activity which has 12 undulations of its own. That's where the 972 comes from, that extra 12. Okay. Yeah, this chakra is usually the last to be awakened. Not always, but usually. So people tend to think that the chakras kind of awaken from the base and go up, but that's not necessarily true. You could have an awakened heart chakra, but a closed, an imbalanced root chakra.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't necessarily go in any particular order. So in the beginning, it is the same size as the others, but as the man progresses on the path of spiritual advancement, it increases steadily until it covers almost the whole top of the head. Another peculiarity attends its development. It is at first a depression in the etheric body, as are all the others, because through them, the divine force flows in from without. But when the man realizes his position as a king of the divine light, dispensing largesse to all around him, this chakra reverses itself, turning, as it were, inside out. It is no longer a channel of reception, but of radiation. No longer a depression, but a prominence, standing out from the head as a dome, a veritable crown of glory. In Oriental pictures and statues of the deities of great men, this prominence is often shown. In figure 1.2 in the book, appears on the head of a statue of Lord Buddha at Borobudur in Java. If you haven't seen Borobudur, it's this incredible, megalithic temple in Indonesia. It's remarkable. Borobudur. Look that up. This is the conventional method of representing it, and in this form, it is to be found upon the heads of thousands of images of the Lord Buddha all over the Eastern world. In many cases, it will be seen that the two tiers of the Sahasrara chakra are copied, the larger dome of 960 petals first, and then the smaller dome of 12 rising out of that in turn. The head on the right, so the other picture is of Brahma from one of the temples in Nara in Japan, and it will be seen that the statue is wearing a headdress fashioned to represent this chakra, though in a form somewhat different from the last, showing the coronet of flame shooting up from it. It appears also in the Christian symbology, in the crowns worn by the 24 elders who are forever casting them down before the throne of God. This is in Revelations. In the highly developed man, this coronal chakra pours out splendor and glory, which makes for him a veritable crown. And the meaning of the passage of the scripture is that all that he has gained, the magnificent karma that he makes, and all the wondrous spiritual force that he generates, all that he casts perpetually at the feet of the Logos to be used in his work. When he says Logos there, he's talking about the solar Logos, which is the entity that would encompass the entirety of our solar system. So let's say that the Earth and all the planets are conscious entities. The sun, the entire solar system itself, is also a conscious entity. So when the Theosophists use the word Logos, that's what they're talking about. So over and over again, can he continue to cast down his golden crown because it continually reforms as a force wells up from within him. So that's how he describes crown chakra.
Yeah, when you see like paintings of all the masters, like even Jesus, he always has the, corona or the nimbus around his head. It's golden. It's interesting because a lot of Christians think that chakras and yoga and stuff is evil, when actually I feel like it can work and kind of be like collaborate with all the religions, and there's a place for it even within Christianity. That helps make sense of it. It's just kind of been rejected and separated, so they can't see that it's actually painted and spoken of, and it's in their book. They just don't understand the connection that it's making.
If you see a halo above a Christian figure, iconography or whatever, it's representing crown chakra.
Right. It's fully open. They're fully aware. They're a fully awakened being.
Yes.
And so that's what makes them a master.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. We're kind of coming to the end of this episode, but we'll be exploring more about, the vital force and the spinal channels and things like that in the next episode. Do you have any events coming up that you would like to share before we close?
Possibly. We have, I'll be doing a 300-hour teacher training at Renegade Yoga Center at the first of the year. That's not confirmed yet, but it's a possibility. It's a good possibility. So that's about the only thing that's coming up at this point. So.
Okay, so they could follow you on Instagram and get updates on that?
Yeah, Renegade Yoga on either Facebook or Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. That
that'd be great.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to explain this for us. You did such a wonderful job, and I really appreciate all the wisdom that you share with our audience.
Oh, my pleasure. This is one of my favorite subjects, and it relates intimately to what we do at Renegade. So I'm very happy to present this.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you. When I was doing the etheric double episode, there was a point where I could have went into the chakras, but I was like, I want you to be the one that presents this information.
I appreciate that.
Because you're just so good at articulating and saying some of the fancy Sanskrit words that I butcher. So.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, they're not easy to pronounce. It's taken me many years to figure out how to get them, and I still don't know that I've got them exactly right, but I'm getting there. So.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure, Astral. Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.